Ever think about like uh, those intricate designs you see,
Mm.
like on jewelry or antique guns?
Mm.
We're talking metal engraving, right?
Mhm.
A craft that's been around forever, and we're diving deep on what it takes to make it as a metal engraver today in the 21st century.
Right.
We've got excerpts from RoleCatcher's career platform, and
Okay.
they're packed with info
Yeah.
on everything from the tools to landing a job.
Yeah, it's interesting how this field has stuck around. You'd think with all the tech these days, hand engraving would be, well, kind of a thing of the past, right?
Right.
But honestly, the core skills, that precision, the eye for detail, the artistic vision, you can't replace that.
Totally. Okay, so let's break this down. RoleCatcher mentions tools like gravers and burins.
Right.
Now, for those of us who, haven't tried this,
Yeah.
what are those exactly? What's it like to use them?
So think of a really, really fine chisel,
Okay.
almost like a sharp pen, but for metal.
Oh, okay.
That's basically a burin. You hold it at just the right angle and carefully carve lines into the metal.
Wow.
Gravers are similar, yeah, but they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, so you can get different kinds of lines and textures.
I see.
It takes a steady hand, obviously, lots of patience, and you have to develop a feel for how the metal, reacts to each stroke.
There's a real learning curve then.
Yeah,
The guides also mention how different metals, they don't react the same way to engraving.
right.
Can you talk a little more about that?
Oh, yeah, totally. Imagine, it's like the difference between carving wood and carving stone.
Okay.
So something like copper, a softer metal, it's more, what's the word, forgiving.
Malleable.
Yeah, malleable. You can get finer detail. Steel, on the other hand, that's tough, requires more force, different tools.
Right.
And even within those, there are differences. Take sterling silver.
Yeah.
It's popular for jewelry because it's pretty soft and easy to work with, but it tarnishes easily, which, as an engraver, you have to keep in mind.
So it's not just knowing the tools, it's knowing the materials inside and out.
Exactly.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Now, career-wise, the guides mention apprenticeships as a common way to start.
Right, very common.
What's that like?
Apprenticeships are great in this field, just invaluable because it's so hands-on.
Right.
It's not theoretical. You're right there in the workshop, getting a feel for the metal, how to control the tools,
Yeah.
probably making a few mistakes along the way. You start with the basics, prepping materials, polishing finished pieces, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And you slowly work your way up to the more complex stuff under, the watchful eye of some more seasoned engraver.
So it's like mentorship, hands-on learning, all in one,
Exactly.
which makes sense for such a niche skill.
Mm.
Now, the guides also talk about the pros and cons of this career path. Let's start with the good stuff. What are some of the most rewarding parts of being a metal engraver?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is the creative freedom. I mean, you're basically taking this blank slate of metal and turning it into something beautiful and often something meaningful,
Right.
There's a lot of pride in that. And because it's such a specialized skill set, the income potential is there, especially as you get better, build a name for yourself.
Right. High income, and you get to be creative. Who wouldn't want that?
Yeah.
But gotta ask, what about the downsides? The guides mention some tough parts too.
Yeah, it's not always easy, that's for sure. It can be hard on your body, You're often stuck in kind of awkward positions for hours at a time.
Ouch.
And then there's the whole precision thing, even a tiny slip up can mean starting the whole thing over.
Yeah, I can see that.
Really tests your patience, and your focus. Plus, depending what materials you're using, the techniques, there's some risks. Metal dust, sharp tools, that sort of thing.
Right. You gotta stay safe. So you need real dedication, attention to detail for sure. Makes sense. But for those who are like, yeah, this is for me, how do you even get started? It's not just making an Etsy shop, right?
There's more to it than that. A portfolio, that's key. That's where apprenticeships come in, or even doing some small projects, for yourself.
Okay.
Gives you something to show potential clients, employers. And as you get better, platforms like RoleCatcher, they can be really helpful connecting you with opportunities.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, they even have resources for building your online presence, handling the business side.
That's really interesting. So they're kind of bridging that gap between the art itself and like the business skills you need.
Exactly.
Now, what about technology? The guides talk about CAD software and laser engraving. How do those fit in with something so traditionally handcrafted as metal engraving?
It's kind of cool, actually. It's like old school meets new school.
Yep.
Take CAD, for example.
Yeah.
Engravers can create these super intricate designs on the computer. It's easy to change things up, even try out different depths for the engraving patterns, all virtually.
Oh, wow.
So it opens up what you can design, but also makes the whole process smoother, especially for super detailed pieces like crests or logos.
It's like, it's not replacing the human touch, it's just giving the artist more tools, right?
Exactly, enhancing their abilities.
What about laser engraving? That sounds very high-tech.
It is. Basically, you're using a laser beam to etch the design onto the metal.
Okay.
Crazy precise, crazy efficient, especially if you're doing large-scale stuff or need to repeat patterns. It doesn't have that same, like, handcrafted feel as traditional engraving, but it's perfect for manufacturing industrial work where you need speed and consistency.
So technology is making new paths in the field, offering different ways to be an engraver depending what you're into, what your skills are. Now, let's say someone's listening and they're hooked. They're like, I want to give metal engraving a shot. What's your advice for landing that first job? Well, I mean, they're already listening to us, so that's a good first step, right?
Definitely shows they're curious, doing their research. That's huge. Practically speaking, though, build that portfolio. Make sure it shows what you can do, different styles, all that.
It's like their showcase, right?
Exactly. Like an artist's portfolio, it's your visual resume. And RoleCatcher talks about nailing the interview, too, which is important.
Right, makes sense. What kind of questions should they be ready for? How can they practice?
Be prepared to talk about your experience. Different metals, engraving techniques, you know. Like, could you explain the difference between, say, line engraving and stippling? What types of gravers are you most comfortable with? Might seem basic,
Right.
but they show you know your stuff.
Yeah, like they want to know you can actually do the work, not just talk about it.
Exactly. And be ready for anything, you know. They might give you a design challenge on the spot. See how you think on your feet.
Oh, interesting.
Like,
okay.
imagine a client wants their family crest on a curved surface. How do you make sure it's accurate, clear, that sort of thing?
Wow, it's like a metal engraving puzzle.
Right. Shows problem solving, understanding the little details.
Speaking of details, what about that confidentiality thing we mentioned earlier? How does that come up?
Yeah, it might seem minor, but it's super important in this line of work. They might ask about how you handle sensitive client info, especially with custom designs, valuable pieces.
Sure.
They want to know their ideas are safe, you know?
So it's not just the skills, it's being a professional, being ethical,
Yeah,
which makes a lot of sense when you're trusted with those skills.
exactly.
I gotta say, this has been really eye-opening. Who knew there was so much to learn about metal engraving?
Right. It's a whole world.
Like hidden in plain sight.
Mhm.
We see engravings all the time, but we don't really think about what goes into them.
And for the people who are drawn to it, it's such a cool mix. The creativity, the technical skill, and knowing you're creating something that'll last.
Totally, totally. Well, if anyone's listening and they're intrigued, definitely check out those RoleCatcher resources. They're a goldmine for anyone wanting to get into engraving. And hey, maybe one day we'll have you on showing off your work. Until then, thanks for joining us. This is a fascinating look into the world of metal engraving.